me. My name is Netta Sarabi, and I'm the new CPRE president. I wish we were meeting under different circumstances, but I hope that everyone is staying healthy and safe. And I'm super, super excited to introduce Allison, who is the founder of CRE, and she has tons of years of experience in this industry. So I hope that this presentation is helpful for everyone. We all learn something. So without further ado, I'm going to hand it off to Allison to get started on her presentation.
Awesome. Thanks, Netta. And so great to be here with you guys. And I just want to echo Netta. I would much rather be in front of you in person, and maybe sometime we can make that happen. I have a action-packed sort of webinar and slides to go through with you. So I'm going to be speaking probably a little bit faster than normal because this is probably about an hour's worth of time. So just want to point out a couple of things quickly before we get started. One, there's a Q&A function. So if you do have questions that arise while I'm speaking, feel free to pop them into the Q&A. I will do my best to answer all of the questions, and I actually have time to stay a little bit beyond our end time today. So no silly questions, please. If you have a question, it's likely someone else has it too. So pop it into the Q&A. Also want to challenge you, rather than furiously taking notes on what I'm saying, try to be as present as possible. I have a great outline full of resources for you, really great articles, podcasts, videos, etc., that reinforce all the points that I'm going to be making today. So don't worry about notes, and we will send out both a resource guide and a replay to you guys, hopefully later on today or tomorrow. So you'll have everything that you need to sort of make the most out of the information that I'm giving you. So with that, just high level into my background, I've been a recruiter for 10 years within the commercial real estate space for the last 6+. Primarily worked at some of the larger brokerage firms, recruiting teams of brokers, identifying acquisition targets, and recruiting sort of core positions within the organization. I started my own company, CRE Recruiting, which does national talent acquisition across all facets of the commercial real estate industry. And CRE at Work is sort of my new brainchild. You know, at CRE Recruiting, I was only able to help people when they either needed to find a new job or needed to hire someone. And so CRE at Work is all about helping people sort of throughout their careers, helping them whether they are, you know, growing just a career path for themselves or growing a business. So that's what I'm working on. Want to jump right into today's outline. The bulk of today is going to be focused on really tactical, actionable advice for you, whether you're looking for an internship or a postgraduate opportunity. But I am going to start with a job market overview and a CRE market overview for you. And as I mentioned, I will stop multiple times during my presentation to ask for questions, but hopefully we'll also have a nice Q&A session at the end. So without further ado, the labor market, just at a very high level, want to point out probably the obvious to you guys that this is really a shocking, sort of unprecedented event. I know you've heard that word probably thousands of times by now. Over 33 million people have filed for unemployment, and that represents just over 15% of the total labor force. I like to put that in perspective with all of the jobs in California. So this is approaching nearly double all of the jobs in the state of California. California is by far and away the state with the most jobs in the US. It's totally wiped out all of the gains that we've experienced since sort of the recovery began of the Great Recession in 2010. And also wanted to point out just local market effects. You know, in California, it's predicted by the governor that 18% will be our unemployment rate shortly. And LA unemployment right now is actually at 24%, and that's according to the Times. Some of these other numbers, the Washington Post, I have those articles linked in the resource guide for you so you can take a look there. But I really want to spend more time on what's happening within commercial real estate. The quote that you see here is from CBRE. They do a great weekly sort of update called the Weekly Take that I like to use. They're estimating that we are in for a recovery period of 24 to 30 months now, readjusted depending on the sector of the business that we're talking about. So certain sectors like retail, hospitality, much more hard hit than the others. And that's where you're going to see the difference between 24 and 30 months. So where we're at today, I think companies are definitely in wait and see mode. I can tell you this because I work directly in getting people jobs and hiring within commercial real estate. I do have a handful of clients that are still hiring, but those roles are tending to be frontline sort of brokerage and sales roles. This tends to be true regardless of the timing, but the closer you are in your role to generating revenue or supporting the revenue initiatives of a company, the more likely you are to get a job or keep a job during a recessionary sort of time like this. And one of the things that I'm seeing and think will start to happen in a more significant way over the next few weeks is temporary sort of contract and project-based hiring. That'll become much more common and pick up just as soon as we start to see some signs of recovery, similar to how it happened during the Great Recession. There are a couple different, what I would call emerging or recession-driven niches that I think are interesting and I think are experiencing hiring despite what's going on. Things related to logistics. Obviously, we're in our houses, our apartments, and we're ordering a lot more online. So that last mile sort of logistics, which has been hot over the last several years. New things like ghost kitchens, this idea that you would take sort of the back end of a restaurant and put it into an industrial environment and really automate as much as possible and sort of be that expediter, if you will, for for some of these delivery services. That's coming into prominence, in addition to data centers. Obviously, we're supporting a lot of the expansion of online platforms like Zoom and others, and also healthcare. So those are a couple different ways that I think our business is going to be growing. As I mentioned, sort of the hardest hit retail and hospitality, I think office is going to have to change a lot, also multifamily. The least hit, if I had to, sort of characterize one of the assets, is probably industrial. Industrial will still have some challenges, but it will be less challenged than some of the others that I've mentioned. In brokerage, you're seeing a lot fewer transactions happening. Deals have definitely slowed down, and there's more of a focus today on renegotiating maybe existing leases. And I think what we've seen too, especially from some of the larger brokerage firms, is during the really, strong last 10 years of growth that we've had, they've grown pretty big from an infrastructure and support standpoint. And so I think some of that growth was probably unsustainable and is going through sort of a right sizing process at the moment. Debt and equity finance, definitely less liquidity in the market. As you saw the last few years, potentially there was a huge influx of new capital to the market. Specifically, I'm thinking of debt funds, a lot of debt funds during the market. I think those people are probably retreating. They have less liquidity, less ability to get deals done. And that directly impacts all other facets of the market, like development and construction. Incredibly hard to build if you can't finance it, and most people don't have the cash on hand to completely bankroll their deals. There's also the question in development and construction about regulation of work sites. So that's something that hasn't completely shaken out yet. I do think that there will be some net winners of this time, and potentially if you have cash or financing on hand, property values are expected to drop. That's anywhere between 15 to 20% is what commonly is out there by some of the experts. And so depending on what your, if you're a principal investor, what is the makeup of your portfolio, what grade of assets, what geographic location, et cetera, that is going to determine how successful you are during this time. And sort of the net losers of this scenario, I think, a lot of the tech companies that were, maybe pre-revenue, maybe the disrupting sort of companies within co-working that are highly leveraged and again, sort of pre-revenue or not turning a profit. You've seen that sort of fall apart and be very, very challenged. So the future is the $1 million question. And I think that there are some things that you can see and, take a look at what the experts are saying. I have a great article for you that McKinsey put together, and a couple of the things that they said, and also some things that, you know, just generally the experts are saying in the market is, it's interesting. You'll find exact opposite. So some people will say, hey, they're going to be smaller footprints in offices because some roles are just going to stay remote. And then there are other people saying, no, of course not. You'll need more space because you're going to need to allocate, you know, more separation, more distance, more safety measures between employees. So I do think that generally you'll see a movement away from open office plans and increase on really, you know, high standards for hygiene, which is not a bad thing. And I don't think the role of technology is going to go away. In fact, I think it's just going to become even more prominent as we go forward. Another thing that I think is probably coming for the future is a change to compensation in our business. Just in line with the cascading sort of effects of, you know, changes to revenue for companies or profitability and rents. I think those will all trickle down, and, you know, again, it's hard to say how much, and, you know, if I had a crystal ball, I'd be a millionaire, but I think that those are probably the things that we are most likely to see in the future for our business. So that was really fast. That was a lot of information. If you have questions on the CRE market, the job market, anything like that, please pop them into the Q&A now. And I'm just going to take a pause and see if we have questions on that before moving on. Oops. Okay. All right, moving on. So want to head right into the really tactical advice in terms of how do you conduct a really solid career search, whether that is related to an internship or a postgraduate opportunity. The first thing that I think a lot of people miss is probably the most important, and that is to spend time getting clarity on exactly what your goals and values are. So I want to encourage you to think more short term versus long term. I think, you know, the way that the world is moving and changing so fast, really looking at your time in smaller chunks, whether it's 30 days, 60 days, 90 days, as opposed to, hey, what am I going to do 5 years from now, is probably a more effective way to manage all of the turbulence that we're experiencing in the market right now. So think about what are the things that you want to accomplish in the next 30, 60, 90 days? And also, how does that relate? What is the long-term vision that you have for your life? And let's figure out what those short-term goals are that you can work on today that are going to get you closer to that vision. Another component of this is your core values. What are the things that you really stand for as a person? What's important to you? What do you want to find in an employer, and what sort of resonates with you? So maybe it's, maybe it's the opportunity to continue learning and growing professionally. The reason it's important to understand what your goals are as a person is you can then measure the companies that you're considering as to how they align with your individual goals. And it just gives you more information as you're making a decision and taking interviews and going through hiring processes. So there's a really good exercise and article, two different things that I have for you on discovering your core values. I really do think it's a great investment of time, and that's something that we have maybe an abundance of now that we won't have in the future. So spend the time, be introspective and reflective, and figure out sort of what's important to you, both from a vision standpoint, short-term and long-term, but also your core values. I want to point out, potentially the obvious to you, in that I think that one of the things that we're gaining from this situation, one of the silver linings, if you will, is the destruction of this idea that you are a different person at work than you are at home. I think, the coronavirus situation has really sort of blurred the lines of maybe our personal and our professional lives. So I want you to think about yourself sort of as a whole person, and think about your goals as they relate to not just your professional or personal goals, but integrating the two. And how can you really create a life of your own design that sort of matches your values and what's important to you? I also want to point out just a quick exercise or something that has really helped me in this area, and that's the Start Today journal. It's actually something that was developed by an author called Rachel Hollis. She's a New York Times bestseller multiple times. And essentially, the process is to create the 10-year vision for your life, which leads then to the 10 dreams that you need to accomplish to achieve that vision. And so you're writing those goals that you have for your life every single day as if you've achieved them. And then you're choosing on a daily basis the one goal that you're going to work on today to achieve that overall vision. And so that level of focus for me and that level of clarity has just been really, really valuable. So wanted to share that with you. So moving on, oh, some of my slides got inverted. Tough times don't last, tough people do. That's just a fun quote. And that was supposed to kick off the job seeking section. So moving on, virtual relationship building. People ask me all the time about networking. I really encourage you to think about networking as relationship building. Networking feels way too much like, hey, what's in it for me? Relationship building feels much more mutually beneficial. So how can I connect with people with the intention of establishing long-term sort of valuable connections for both of us? So think about that. If you don't have LinkedIn, LinkedIn is such an important resource. Either create a profile, revamp your existing profile, and set some goals about your daily LinkedIn use. I think with social media, with any platform, the tendency is to scroll, and maybe compare yourself to all the other people there. I really want you to be intentional and set some, really concrete measurements for yourself. So when I go on LinkedIn, for instance, I might give myself 30 minutes and I'll put a timer on my phone for 30 minutes. And within those 30 minutes, I want to have 5 reactions or 5 likes to different pieces of content that I see. I might want to make 2 new connections and leave 2 comments on posts that resonate with me. And maybe 3 times a week, I want to put up a post of my own, whether I am sharing maybe an article that I wrote or even just sharing somebody else's article, but pointing out what resonated with me. And then that way on a weekly basis, I have some really concrete objectives for myself that I am accomplishing. And again, I'm not wasting time. So recommend that you use LinkedIn as a tool to diversify your network. And again, think about what are your goals? What is that short-term goal that you have for yourself? If it's to be an analyst within a development company, you're going to want to diversify your network in that direction. So think about who are the people that you might know, maybe they're Cal Poly alums who are in similar roles, connect with them, build those relationships. And the idea is that today you can't meet people in person, right? But what you can do is you can build a foundation for those people to know you and want to meet with you in person when the world gets back to whatever normal it's going to be in the future. Also want to point out just some obvious things maybe to some of you. Groups, hashtags, and who you follow on LinkedIn are great ways to serve up content, again, in the direction of your goals. So let's say, again, back to that goal of being a financial analyst within a development company, maybe I can find some groups on LinkedIn that are related to development, or maybe there's a specific niche within development that I'm really interested in, like affordable housing or the LIHTC space. So seek out groups. There are great groups out there. If you're just looking to learn generally about our industry, there are some really great trade groups that I want to point you to. One of my favorites is ICSC, or the International Council of Shopping Centers. It's a retail-focused organization. They have 2 groups. One is a general group, and the second is for people who are newer to the industry and to the business, their next generation group. So they serve up great content, great opportunities for, professional development, learning, etc. Hashtags is another way to follow, different hashtags that are going to relate to interests that you have. So maybe one of the interests that you have is entrepreneurship or leadership or multifamily investing. Those are all hashtags that people put onto their posts. So if you follow the hashtag, it's going to curate very specific content into your timeline, and that's going to save you time as you go into LinkedIn with your 30-minute a day goal and are reviewing content. Following, I want to point out, there's some superstars in our business who are probably never going to accept a connection request from me or from you. You know, they're just such a big deal. They don't have the time. Maybe they aren't even monitoring their own LinkedIn account, but you have the opportunity to follow them. So following them will expose you to all of the content that they're posting, the things that they're commenting on, etc. They will get a notification, just want to point out, if you follow them. So there's really no stealth way to sort of follow someone at this point, but that's another great option for you. And also just want to point out, again, this might be obvious to you, but anytime I'm trying to build a relationship with someone, I try to focus on what we have in common or focus on the connection that we have. So whether that's, you know, you both are long distance runners, you both grew up in the Midwest and now are in California, you both like, you know, a specific football team or something like that. Those are all different things that you can focus on when you're building a relationship. And a LinkedIn profile is chock full of potential connection points. Just make sure you're spending the time reviewing that LinkedIn profile before you're reaching out, so you can do it in a thoughtful way that focuses on what you have in common to sort of build that bridge for the future. All right. Differentiating yourself is something that I get questions about all of the time. And actually, let me pause for a second. I see we have a question from Ryan. Do you have any tips for maintaining relationships after making the introductory phone/video call? Yes, and actually that's something that I'll answer on this slide with news you can use. That's my favorite way to maintain the relationship. So I'm going to talk about that in just a second. I'm going to look at one more question. So curious if you have any relationship building techniques for reaching out to higher level professionals who seem to never have time. Is it best to call, email, go through LinkedIn, or any other ways? Jack, great question. I think the most effective thing is either to probably email or use LinkedIn. Oftentimes, if they're a very busy person, they might have someone else monitoring their email for them. And I would just recognize, as you're reaching out to this person in your outreach, that you know that they're a very busy person and you respect their time. And so this is how you're going to make sure it's a really impactful conversation, and so on and so forth. So I actually have a good template in the resource guide that is more geared towards how do you reach out to somebody who's an alumni of the same program, but you can modify it. And the idea is that you're setting the stage for, you know, this is why you're reaching out to them. You respect that they're very, very busy. You will prepare in advance for the conversation. It will only be, you know, XYZ minutes long. And you can even send them the questions in advance just to make it really, really easy for them to say yes to you. So those are all things I would recommend. There's a good template for you to use in the resource guide. And two, I'm available after this. Calls, emails, questions like this, happy to, you know, produce individual sort of recommendations and templates as well. So I'm going to jump back in to differentiating yourself. One of the things that I am striving to get better at every single day is figuring out how I can add value for people. So when I'm connecting with individuals on LinkedIn, even though I've been in this business for many years, I have a strong network, I'm always trying to add value with every interaction and asking myself, when confronted with a new person, how can I help this person? The idea is that I want to position myself as someone who is a thought leader that people know, like, and trust. That's what I mean by the KLT factors, right? You know that old saying, people do business with those they know, like, and trust. So how can I position myself online in every interaction as someone who, you know, is likable and trustworthy? And I do that by asking great questions. I think this is something that people take for granted. When they do get the time with a very busy executive, what you want to do is really impress them with the amount of research that you've done, and also coming to them with very thought-provoking questions. So I have a couple different resources for you on that, literally articles chock full. One even has 60 thought-provoking questions. And so making sure that you are prepared when you are given the opportunity to make a great impression, I think is the most valuable thing and the best use of your time. I mentioned news you can use as a great way to stay in touch. Every interaction that I have with someone, whether it's a professional conversation or a personal conversation, I like to think of myself as sort of a scientist in all these interactions. So I'm getting data points on this person. Maybe it's, their kid is into Peppa Pig, or maybe it's, their daughter plays traveling volleyball, or maybe it's, that they're a huge Green Bay Packer fan. Whatever information that they're giving me, I'm sort of tucking away in my brain, and I'm taking note of. Maybe I'm doing that in their contact on my phone. Maybe I'm doing it some other way after our interaction. I just have a memory for these things. So if you don't have a memory for these things, find a way to capture that information, because then you can use that in highly personalized, relevant follow-up with that individual. So if I know that somebody is a Green Bay Packer fan, I might send them an article about the fallout from Aaron Rodgers and them drafting this new quarterback during the draft, and see what their thoughts are on that. If I know their daughter is into Peppa Pig, I might send them, I might send them the latest video that, they put out on Peppa Pig, or maybe I see that, there's a Peppa Pig toy on sale at Target, and I send them a link to that. Those really small interactions, showing that person that you know them, you see them, you remember what's important to them, will cement you in their memory. I mean, I remember kids' names, I remember birthdays, I remember as much as I possibly can about people. And I use that to show them that I value our connection and it's important to me. And, I use that as much as possible to my advantage. Last point on this slide that I think is, maybe makes some of you a little anxious, is this idea of creatively using media. And I want to share a quick story on this particular point. So there's a guy that I knew sort of tangentially. He was a friend of a friend on LinkedIn. He's a multifamily investor, former NFL player, just really, really cool guy, great content, super uplifting, positive, motivational. And I didn't know him personally, so I hadn't connected with him, but I'd probably liked some of his things just because other people in my network had liked it. He sent me a connection request, and I accepted it right away, and I was excited to be connected to him. And before I even had a chance to respond to him to say, hey, thanks for connecting with me, he sent me a video. He literally had pulled out his iPhone and said, hey, Allison, so excited that we're connected. I know you're friends with so-and-so. He also mentioned something that he found interesting on my LinkedIn profile. And he said, would love to find a way to work together. Let me know how I can help you. One, that just blew me away. It did not take any time at all for him to do that. It was super authentic. It was super simple, straightforward. It was, something that really cemented the relationship, or the beginning of the relationship, for me to know, like, and trust him, because he went above and beyond. He took the time to, customize and create this little video for me. And immediately he was somebody I needed to know more about and wanted to work with in the future. So I would imagine not a lot of people are out there doing that. I can tell you I have, something like 6,000 connections on LinkedIn. He's the only person who ever sent me a video. If the thought of creating or recording a personalized video makes you want to puke, I totally get it. Maybe you can record maybe a voice message. Maybe you can just send a TED Talk. Or some video content that resonated with you. Get creative and think about what are the bits of content or media that you can share to leave a positive impression on people's minds. So conducting a search, a lot of this, again, you might think is pretty obvious, but one of the most important things I think we need to consider is our mindset and the energy that we are bringing to our search. So thinking about what is the routine, maybe what can you do to, sort of prime yourself to have really positive energy, a really positive outlook. All of that's going to come through either over the phone or on the Zoom call. How enthusiastic you are, how excited you are, all of those things. A couple of different things that I've done during the quarantine period specifically that have helped me. One, I'm participating in something called the Next 90-Day Challenge, and there's a link to it in the resource guide if you want to check it out. It's a totally free challenge. There's weekly coaching around a specific topic. This week it's on resilience. There's also podcasts that go along with it, and there's a community online of people who are all going through this challenge together to sort of support each other, share wins, et cetera, et cetera. Another thing maybe you can do is create sort of more routine around your mornings or your evenings, and want to point out the Miracle Morning. The Miracle Morning is a great community. They have an acronym that stands for the things that they do every morning. They wake up early. They wake up at like 5 a.m. and that's the part that's not so great for me. But their acronym is SAVERS. So S is for scribing or writing, A is for affirmations, it's V for visualizations, E for exercise, R for reading, and S for silence or meditation. So it's just a way to, again, get yourself into a really great frame of mind and to make sure that you are bringing the appropriate energy and enthusiasm to your interactions. Another way is to make sure that you're not doing this alone. I think a lot of us have this, sort of do-it-yourself mentality, and it's unnecessary, and it's probably a slower way to get things done. So think about who in this real estate club you might be friends with. Who do you think can hold you accountable, and who can you help? And whether it's just a partnership or it's a small group, there are different ways to structure it. I have videos and podcasts as to how do you sort of come up with a strategy that works for you. So take a look at that. And probably the most important thing on this entire slide to me is tracking your progress. I know so often I pick up the phone and call someone who's applied for a job. They have no idea who I am, the name of the job that they applied to, the type of role it is, et cetera, et cetera. It doesn't leave the best first impression behind. And I know that that's not necessarily the intention of the person that I'm calling, but I know that they probably just aren't organized with that information. So I have a great simple Excel template that you can use that allows you to sort of put in all of the relevant information about the jobs that you're applying for. Maybe if you can see who posted the job, a link to the job posting, some of the reasons that you thought it was interesting or a good fit with your background, questions that you have, et cetera. The idea is that also as you get into, maybe a few weeks from now, things loosen up a bit, the interview process for a couple different positions, it helps you to put those positions side by side and start to evaluate them in terms of maybe it's compensation, maybe it's career path or benefits, all of those things. So think about that. And make sure that you have a plan and are scheduling your time. Think back to when you set your short-term and long-term goals. Every single day, you should be taking forward decisive action towards those short-term goals and long-term goals. So putting it into your calendar, whether you have a physical planner, I have a physical planner still, that's the way my brain works. I also put things in Outlook or, maybe a Gmail calendar or whatever, whatever works for you, but make sure you're structuring your days and structuring your time to, tackle and achieve all those goals that you have for yourself. So I'm going to do one more slide and then I'm going to take another quick pause for questions. Actually, I'm going to try to, looking at the time, it's 11:43. So I'm going to go a little bit faster now and we'll take all questions at the end. So uncovering opportunities, specifically here, I'm talking about contract-based roles. So if you're looking for maybe opportunities to get some experience either while you're still in school or while the job market is tight, one of the things you can do obviously is partner with a recruiter. I, of course, would suggest that you partner with someone who really knows our business, who understands its unique vocabulary and the way that it works. You can sign up for freelancing platforms. I have a giant list for you of all the different kinds. To be really effective in freelancing, you need to understand what services you're going to offer and what rates you're going to charge. And a lot of that information you can find by doing research on the freelancing sites. And the idea is that you come up with what are the services that you're going to offer. So back to the direction of my search, if my goal is going to be an analyst within a development environment, maybe I can offer the service of underwriting specific property types that I'm familiar with, or maybe packaging deals or what have you. Warm outreach is reaching out to the people that you know, people that you're connected to. Maybe this is a former employer that you were an intern for. Maybe this is some colleagues that you had from an internship. Cold outreach is doing LinkedIn networking, internet research, cold emailing, and cold calling. So getting creative, I think, you know, back to that example of wanting to be that analyst with a development company. If I know that that's my goal and I suck at Excel, I've got a gap and I've got to mind it. And all I mean by mind the gap is figure out what is the checklist of the opportunity that you're looking at. So think of the job description as a checklist. And what are the actual skills that you have and all the things that are missing, going out and tackling those and really getting smart as to improving and making sure that you are the exact right fit for the roles that you're applying for. So there's lots of opportunities to do that. There are commercial real estate specific training courses that you can take. The good news is while you're a student or a recent graduate, usually you can get better deals on these types of training programs. People always ask me specifically about Argus certification. Most of my clients, when they're hiring for that, they're looking for someone who's actually done hands-on work in it at a minimum in an internship experience. So unless you can get a really good sort of screaming deal on it, I would say maybe hold off until you can get some hands-on experience with the software. But I've got a big list for you in terms of courses, podcasts, books, resources, tools, etc. And a way to cement the learning for yourself is to teach it to somebody else. So teach it to maybe your accountability partner in the job search process or your group, or maybe to the real estate club on one of your Tuesday meetings. That will just help you to really cement sort of the learning and the content and get even smarter on a topic. Last thing I want to talk about before I get into internships and postgraduate opportunities is really utilizing your alumni network. And this is where the template comes into play that I was mentioning. What I would tell you just generally right now is to have coffee with people, as much coffee, as many cups of coffee as you can handle. You can do the same thing today, just virtually. So think about Zoom as an opportunity to have coffee with these people who are, you know, alumni of your program. Transition from your club to whatever the alumni group is if you're graduating. So how can you build the momentum from your time in undergrad into the real world and get involved in a higher level? I think what is impressive to me and impressive to potential employers is when people take leadership roles and have the opportunity to, you know, connect their fellow alumni network with different opportunities. So maybe there's a way for you to be a leader. Maybe there's a way for you to volunteer at an event or plan an event or connect the group with maybe another chapter in another part of the country. So take it upon yourself, not just to be a member, but to be involved. And that will give you an excuse to reach out to all these different leaders and make new connections and network, not just on behalf of yourself, but on behalf of the alumni group. All right. I'm just going to go into searching for internships. Before you think about reaching out to, you know, people maybe outside of your Cal Poly network, connect with the people inside. So look at the people that are in the club that maybe had internships that you found exciting. Understanding who had internships where will help you to understand where interns might be hired in the future. And the best way to get connected to a potential internship could be at the recommendation of the person who most recently held it. So spend some time networking with each other, understanding where you guys successfully have had internships and where there are opportunities potentially in the future. And use that tight-knit community that you have to really develop your elevator pitch. If your goal is to be that analyst in development, how are you going to talk about that when you're interviewing with people, when you're reaching out to alumni? practicing in a safe environment with people who know the unique vocabulary of our business and can give you feedback as to your messaging, your delivery, your confidence. That'll all make you better before you start trying out that elevator pitch on the real world. So leverage the people in your peer network, not just necessarily people in the club, but maybe it was a TA from one of your courses or your professor or colleagues that you worked alongside in your internship. Make sure you're getting their contact information, you're connecting with them on LinkedIn, and you're asking for their help. I don't know if you've heard of the Ben Franklin effect, but essentially the Reader's Digest version is we like people more when we're able to do them a favor, and that's regardless of if they've done a favor for us before. So this idea that we need to do it alone or can't ask for help is completely false. And some of those same things apply to searching for career opportunities, but some other tactics for you to think about. Postgraduate, if you're really interested in a specific company or a specific niche of the market, set up some Google Alerts. Google Alerts allow you to get a customized digest, daily, weekly, whatever frequency you want, based on topics that are interesting to you. So you're just automating some of your research process. It helps you to understand, one, maybe how are they handling this crisis? That information is going to be tremendously useful for you, maybe in creating questions or having more understanding as you potentially start to interview with them. Back to companies, hashtags, and leaders, same thing. You're just, again, doing as much as possible to get the right information so you can be well informed as you start to reach out to individuals, as you start to network and build relationships and try to get interviews. I encourage everyone also, as you're thinking about the goals that you have short-term and long-term, to really be a scientist about those goals. So maybe, being an analyst in development sounds great, but you've actually never talked to someone who's done that job before. That's the first thing you do. Find the people who have had roles like that. What did they enjoy? What was a challenge? What would they change? And make sure that it resonates with you, the actual day-to-day of the opportunity, not just the way that it sounds or the cachet or the fact that maybe, a family friend or maybe a relative has done that job before. And the idea is, as you're sort of consuming this content, you're interviewing these people, you're going to begin to be able to be more fluent in having a conversation and understanding sort of the direction that you're headed in. And two, again, any gaps that might exist between your existing skill set and the roles that you are entertaining. And again, think about building your network in the direction of the roles and the dreams that you have for yourself. So, if you know you want to be in development, you should connect with people who are in development, people who serve the development industry, maybe vendors who work with developers, et cetera, et cetera. Oh, that was a lot. That was really fast. And I know I zoomed through the last few slides. And actually, this information is wrong for the upcoming webinar. I have another webinar that I'm holding on Friday. This Friday, which I think is the 15th at 11:30 Pacific. And I'll send that information to you in the follow-up. So in the resource guide, you'll have a link to sign up for that webinar. That webinar is specifically more deeply into mindset, order, rituals, and energy for making a transition. But with that, questions, please pop them into the Q&A, and I'm happy to stay as long as necessary to answer all of your questions.
Hey, Allison, can you hear me?
Yes, I see people have hands raised.
Okay.
So we'll do it this way. I didn't know we could do this. So I'm going to let Greg Pantazis. Greg, are you there? You want to ask your question?
Hey, this is Greg. Quick question regarding like macro, kind of like the situation and kind of the future of real estate.
Sure.
So like with offices and like property types kind of being impacted, I've been reading a lot on how there's going to be like a reverse migration, like previously previous like coronavirus, people were coming to the cities. They're talking about people are going to go away from cities.
Yeah.
So you're going to see like basically shopping centers and those type of assets, like in like rundown shopping centers being like the asset classes or like the asset types that developers are going to target so that they can redevelop it for like mixed use, so that it's diversifying, so that if it's not just like one asset class, if they have like multifamily, they have office, they have retail, so that they don't get like impacted by a virus, like where none of their tenants are paying.
Yeah, that's a great question, Greg. I definitely do think that you'll see a lot of that happening. One, just financially, a lot of people I think have taken a hit because of what's happened. And the places where you see a lot of density, places like LA, New York, some of the major, sort of gateway markets of the US tend to have much higher rent. So you've seen a lot of people give up maybe their apartments and sort of flee to some of maybe the suburban and outer lying areas. Definitely this is the case. A lot of my business is in New York. And so a lot of my clients in New York fled to upstate or other sort of parts, that are further afield, but also allow them access into the city. So yes, I think you will see that. Yes, I think you will see a lot of adaptive reuse and a lot of developers and owners looking at diversifying the asset mix within individual properties. So not wanting maybe to do more than a certain percentage of retail, balanced with a certain percentage of office and a certain percentage of multifamily. So you don't see this situation where, like for instance, Simon, which is a huge retail shopping center owner, operator, etc. They might introduce some more live work components to their retail projects, especially maybe in some of these areas with a lot of density where the density has gone down, so they can hedge some of the risk in their retail portfolio with some of these other more stabilizing assets. So definitely, I think that will happen. And that's a super good insight that you had and a great question.
I have a quick follow-up to that question. So because like Zoom has kind of been bullish because of the coronavirus, I've been kind of thinking about the contrarian viewpoint, like basically because like we're like first, about to get internships or jobs, we kind of have to get trained, and it's really hard to do that over Zoom. Do you think that there's the office like asset class will still be like popular and in demand because of like first year hires?
That's a really good question. I think that there are still some traditionalists who want to go back to the office and go back to the way things were. I don't think that it will ever be normal again, or normal in the way that we were experiencing it just a few weeks ago. I personally think, and this is my own opinion coupled with all the conversations I'm having with my clients, some of my clients who are more creative, maybe more technologically savvy, are having no trouble hiring people and training people, and in fact have recently hired and onboarded people who have never physically been to their office before. So there are companies that are doing that well. I think some of the larger companies, some of the, maybe more legacy companies who've been in business maybe 30 plus years are more challenged in navigating this time. So I think those are going to be the companies that are really pushing the let's get back to work. But I think they're also going to evaluate, what roles really need to be in-house versus what roles, can remain remote or have a percentage remote. And so I think you're going to see a lot of shifts. For instance, I just saw, who is the big company that made the announcement? One of the largest brokerage firms just came out and said, it was Avison Young, came out and said that we are going to allow our employees to determine if they feel comfortable returning to work. And if they don't feel comfortable, they're able to work remotely through the end of 2020. So I think that you might see some of that happening, where companies will put it on the employee to make that decision about where they're comfortable and what will work for them moving forward, at least through the end of the year. Great question and follow-up question.
Thank you.
Yep, I see some other questions in Q&A. Most companies that I have been in close contact with have already conducted interviews with for a postgraduate job, are now in hiring freezes. Any advice for how to stay in touch without seeming like a bother? Yes. My first recommendation would be to, as you're following up, try to use any sort of connective, sort of connective experience or common ground that you have with that person, like news you can use. So if you guys talked about, a sports team, or if you talked about you're both from the same part of the country, et cetera, use that in follow up, just to say, hey, I hope you and your family are doing well and thriving during this time. I saw the other day this podcast on XYZ and thought you would find it interesting. I know that things are on hold at the moment, but I just wanted to keep in touch and stay top of mind. I'm still very interested and excited about the opportunity, et cetera, et cetera. There's a couple other things you can do. One, you can offer to help. If there's anything, anything that I know from talking to my clients right now is that most of them are having to do with less, whether it's less time, less resources, maybe fewer colleagues, so more work on the individual. So you can offer to help. And two, I just want you to keep in mind as you're communicating to be sensitive, because a lot of the people maybe who are involved in the hiring processes maybe are worried for their own jobs. They may have just had to help conduct layoffs. And those are people going through really sensitive times. So I just say, I know this is a difficult time and I want to do anything that I possibly can to help. Please let me know if I could be a resource to you in any way. I hope all is well on your end, and I look forward to touching base when things calm down. So I think following up in a very sensitive way, recognizing this is a difficult time, offering your help is never a bad idea. So go ahead and do that. Okay. Would you recommend participating in online courses like REFM during this downtime? Yes, 1,000%. Any investment of time you can make on growing your skill set, growing your expertise, definitely do it. Weigh that against the costs, financial costs, et cetera. But the time, I think, is definitely always worth the investment. And if you have questions on, the efficacy or the, the quality of certain courses, feel free to ask me, because I know a lot of people who've gone through a lot of different courses. How long do you think the real estate job market will be in a squeeze? This is the $1 million question. And if I knew, I'd go buy lottery tickets. I think what I would say is, and what I have been saying is, in the next few weeks, I think hopefully you will start to see some contract or project-based opportunities pop up. Companies right now are just getting maybe the PPP funded, which is the payroll protection. I don't know what the acronym is exactly, but essentially it's government funding that's allowing people to continue to pay people. So a lot of my clients have applied for that. They're just getting that. And so they're able to put that money into their business that might allow them to hire or retain. So I think hopefully you'll see that stuff trickling into the market, and maybe some clients who are willing to, maybe reactivate searches that were happening prior to this all happening, or think about new searches. I do think probably we're still a few weeks away from that. I was hoping that it would be sooner, and it's just not happening yet. So I would say be as patient as you possibly can. Another thing to point out, and I know that this wasn't the question, I don't think that taking a job outside of our industry right now is a bad idea. I think, if that's something that you need to do from a financial standpoint, definitely do that. Also, it just helps you, I think, from a psychological standpoint, right? To have some normalcy, maybe some routine, some busyness in your life. There's no problem with taking a job outside of our industry while you continue to search. Another question, is it still a good idea to go into CRE when the market is down, or wait until the market starts to return? I'm so glad that somebody asked me this question. One of my biggest fears about a time like now is that people will avoid or leave commercial real estate. And that happened a lot in the recession, and that's caused a huge gap in terms of, the talent continuum. If you think about a really healthy workforce, I like to think about it as sort of a generational continuum. So you have people who are always coming into the business brand new out of college. You have people who are sort of early career, mid-career. You have the seasoned veterans, and that's sort of the spectrum. So what happened during the recession is a lot of the people who were coming out of college, early career and mid-career said, screw this. I don't want to do this. It's too scary, too dangerous. I'm going to leave the business. And that left a tremendous gap in terms of now what is more like mid-career sort of commercial real estate professionals. And it's difficult for companies to hire for certain types of roles because a whole bunch of the workforce just got out at that point. I can tell you personally, I have several clients who started their business during the last recession and are very well equipped to navigate these times. And two, there's a mindset I think that some people have and others don't. And it's the idea, like, think about a burning building, right? When a building starts on fire, most of the people run out of the building, but the firefighters run in. The people who run in have an opportunity, whether it's maybe reduced property values and picking up investments at a much lower price than they could have otherwise. Maybe it's less competition because less people are applying for jobs because people have left the business. I definitely think that the best time to learn is during a time like this. You have much more access. You have much more time with the senior people in the business. They don't have as many distractions, and you can learn a lot and get exposure to a lot more potentially than you would in any other time period. So I definitely am super bullish on our business. It is not going anywhere. It's definitely changing. But I think, if I were to give you any advice, it would be to hang in there and to give it a shot. Another question, can you please give us your insight on the brokerage industry and if you predict any decline with the rise of new brokerage technologies? Okay, I want to point out too, it's 12:06. If you have to jump off, I totally understand, but I'll stay as long as possible for questions. So my insight to the brokerage industry, a little bit I said before. One, I worked for two very large brokerage companies, so I've been on the inside, and I think a lot of companies during the good times, when things were very, very good, hired a lot of people to support their businesses. So people who did marketing, people who did research, people who supported brokers, people who were focused on brokerage technology, all the investments that were happening during the high times. I don't think we're always evaluated for sustainability in a market like this. And so even before coronavirus and all of this happened, and I'm talking back to January, February, some of those firms were laying people off in those particular areas, specifically marketing, research, administration, et cetera. So I do think, and I know because I saw and was at companies who were doing this, that they over leveraged and built platforms that were in line maybe with what was happening over the last 10 years, but not necessarily what the future would be. So I do think there's right sizing that's going on. It's terrible because people's, jobs have been lost. And as we identify a lot with our jobs, our companies, our titles, our career paths, et cetera. So I think what I see, and I like to think in continuum. So to use that analogy again, you've got like the independent broker, you've got small, really boutique firms, you've got sort of mid-sized firms, and then you've got these giants, some of which I've worked for. I think that the people who are going to be the most successful during this time are going to be the people who are sort of in that mid-range companies, maybe who are more regional, to the individual independent brokers, because they're able to be more flexible, more dynamic. They're able to quickly pivot. They're able to implement new tools, new technologies, et cetera. I think the decline that you'll see with brokerage technology is going to be related to a lot of the startups. There was a lot of money invested in CRE tech and prop tech, not just related to brokerage, but related to, the Internet of Things and all these different sort of facets of technology within our business. I think you will see a lot of that capital retreat, and a lot of those companies were not existing without having significant investor capital. So yeah, I think that's the biggest change that you'll see. Other questions?
Hey, Allison, can you hear me?
Yes.
I have a quick question regarding senior housing. So senior housing has been pretty hot in the last couple of years, but obviously things are kind of crazy with the virus right now. Have you seen any like shifts in the senior housing industry, or what do you expect to see maybe in the next year or so with all this going on within like the older population, and like where they're going to be going, if they're even going to be going into senior housing?
Yeah. Such a good question. And I agree with you. I think seniors, I've been saying for so many years, like these are the different areas where I see a lot of opportunity. Senior housing is one because of the aging of the baby boomers. Another thing is as these baby boomers go into assisted living or seniors housing or whatever, their stuff has to go somewhere, and their kids don't want to deal with their stuff and they're not ready to get rid of it. So seniors housing, self-storage, there's a couple that are sort of like, oh, when this happens, this happens. So senior housing, I don't think has yet been able to figure out exactly how it's going to weather this storm. One, I think senior housing is a need that never goes away. There will always be an aging population, and because of the culture of our country, I don't think you'll see a huge behavioral change in terms of taking people out of seniors housing and having them live in multi-generational homes. I just don't think that's going to be a change that happens. What I do think will happen is some of the other things that I had mentioned that will be definitely impacting multifamily and office, which is really refined and high standards as it relates to hygiene, occupancy, layout, floor plan, etc. And I think you're seeing some of it happening in retail too. I don't know if you guys saw Soup Plantation just filed for bankruptcy. Buffets, sort of family style restaurants. I think, these are all sort of downstream impacts of this virus. So seniors housing, I think, is going to have to shift much in the way that retail, multifamily, office is going to have to shift. I don't think it's going away, but I think too, herein lies the opportunity. And as I'm talking to, creative people who are coming out of college or who are experienced in this business, there are going to be a lot of companies that don't know what to do, don't know how to interpret maybe the new legislation that comes out, the new roles, like, creating effective build outs that sort of align with these things. So the people who can understand, the changing sort of circumstances, climate, all the things that are happening, and can help companies to navigate those changes, those people are going to be very, very valuable. So as much as you can read up on, there will be legislation, I guarantee it, that relates to, sort of how spaces look and how public spaces are, sanitized, all those things, I think are definitely opportunities for people like you who are creative and are coming out of, great undergraduate and graduate experiences. Great question, Netta.
Thank you. Totally agree.
Yeah. Other questions? All right. I don't see anything.
I think there's one more.
One more. Okay. It is my understanding that after obtaining a real estate related degree, you can test for broker's license. Can you possibly elaborate here? Yes. So every state is different, and every degree program is different, but a lot of the real estate coursework will sort of cover and apply to the learning requirements of getting your brokerage license. So I definitely would take a look into that. Probably the courses that you're taking and maybe some of the experiences that you're having from an internship perspective could apply to you being able to skip some of the required hours. California is one of those states that has a certain hours requirement in terms of education that you need to complete before you can test. And usually that coursework is certified to cover it. So make sure that you have your transcripts when you are sort of navigating that process. CalBRE, and I think it's calbre.gov. I think that's their website. But if you just Google CalBRE, you can find their website, and they will, sort of have information there as to what qualifies and what doesn't. And definitely you want to take advantage of that, because if possible, you don't want to pay twice, and you don't want to go through the process of doing, some of that learning, because I guarantee you that your classes have been better than the pre-work that you would need to do for licensure, because it's mostly residential in focus. It's mostly laws, and it's really boring, icky stuff. Good question. All right. Well, I want to thank you for spending so much time with me. I really appreciated your engagement, your great questions. As a reminder, we will be sending out the resource guide. We will also send out the edited version of the video, so you can rewatch it. Feel free to reach out to me. That's my email address, Allison at CRE Recruiting. I will also include a link to my next webinar focused on mindset, order, ritual, and energy. And I really appreciate the time. Hope you guys are staying safe and having some fun. And I look forward to talking to you soon.
Thank you so much, Allison. We really appreciate that. That was awesome.
My pleasure. All right, take care.